Hey guys, and welcome to Tier 3 of the Creepypasta Iceberg. If you made it this far, you're no strange to internet horror, but now we're venturing into the deep end. The stories in this tier are more obscure, more disturbing, and according to some, even dangerous to read. Unlike the well-known creepypastas from the earlier tiers, these tales come with unsettling backstories, cryptic origins, and eerie real-world connections that blur the line between fiction and reality. Chatroom 98. Chatroom 98 is a classic creepypasta about a strange and unsettling online experience that quickly turns into a terrifying nightmare. The story follows a young man who, out of boredom, stumbles upon an old chat room while browsing the internet late at night. What starts as an innocent online conversation soon spirals into something sinister, leaving him questioning what he just had encountered. The protagonist is a regular internet user who enjoys browsing forums and chat rooms in his free time. One night, while looking for something interesting, he comes across a chat room called Chatroom 98. The name stands out to him because it seemed outdated, almost as if it were something from an older version of the internet. Curious, he decides to join and sees if anyone else is online. As soon as he enters this chat, he notices that there is only a few other users in the room. Their usernames are strange and cryptic, and they don't engage in normal conversation. Instead, they send short, vague messages that don't really make any sense. At first, he thinks they might be bots or just people messing around, but something about the way they all interact was making him feel uneasy. One of the users, a person with the username Help Me, sends him a private message. The message is simple: please get out while you can. Confused, the protagonist asks what they mean, but instead of an explanation, the user suddenly goes offline. This immediately raises red flags, but instead of leaving, the protagonist becomes even more intrigued. As he continues exploring the chat room, the messages from users become increasingly bizarre. Some of them start talking about events from his past, things that no one should know. At first, he assumes it's just a coincidence or even a prank, but the details were too accurate to ignore. Panic sets in when one of the users posts his real name and his home address in the chat. At this point, he knows something is very wrong. The protagonist quickly tries to exit the chat room, but every time he clicks the leave button, nothing happens. As if he's trapped in the chat, unable to close the window. Even restarting his computer doesn't work. The chat room automatically reopens on his screen. Desperate, he tries unplugging the internet, but somehow the messages keep coming through. Then something even more terrifying happens. His webcam, which he thought was turned off, suddenly turns on, and a message appears in the chat: "We can see you." The screen then begins to glitch, and distorted images flash across the display. Among the static, he can make out shadowy figures staring at him from the screen. It feels as though if they are watching him in real time. Just when he thinks things can't get any worse, he hears a noise from outside his room. It's a faint tapping sound, as if someone or something is right outside his window. The messages in the chat become frantic, repeating his name over and over again. He gathers the courage to turn around and look, only to see a dark figure standing outside just his window, watching him. Terrified, he grabs his phone and tries calling for help, but his phone won't work. The screen is frozen, displaying only the same cryptic message: "You should have not entered." Realizing he has no other options, he forces himself to look back at his computer screen one last time. The chat room is now empty, except for a single message that reads, "Goodbye." The screen suddenly goes black, and at the same time, the figure outside his window disappears. His computer finally shuts off and everything in the room is silent. Shaken and unable to comprehend what just had happened, he stays awake the entire night, afraid that whatever was watching might return. The next day, he cautiously turns his computer back on, hoping it was all some kind of elaborate prank or hallucination. But when he searches for Chatroom 98, nothing comes up. There's no record of this chat room ever existing. No matter where he looks, there's no trace of the site, the users, or the messages. It's as the whole experience never happened. However, the protagonist knows better. He can still feel the presence of something watching him, and sometimes out of the corner of his eye, he swears he sees a shadowy figure just beyond his vision. He tries to tell himself it was just a bad dream, but deep down, he knows the truth. He was never supposed to enter Chatroom 98, and now it may never truly leave him alone. The story of Chatroom 98 is a chilling reminder of how the internet, something so familiar and ordinary, can become a gateway to the unknown. It plays on the fear of being watched, the helpless of losing control, and the idea of some things online are better left undiscovered. Whether the chat room was haunted, a cursed website, or something even worse, one thing is clear: some doors should never be opened. Misfortune GB. Misfortune GB is a creepypasta about a mysterious and supposedly cursed Game Boy that brings misfortune to anyone who plays it. The story follows an unnamed protagonist who stumbles upon the game in an old gaming forum, where users talk about a rare and disturbing Game Boy ROM. According to the few people who have played it, Misfortune GB is unlike any other game, and those who try to complete it often experience terrifying consequences in real life. The protagonist, intrigued by the eerie rumors, decides to track down the ROM. After some searching, they manage to find the download link hidden in an old forum thread. The comments on this thread are full of warnings, with people begging others not to play this game. Some users claim they suffered from nightmares, while others say they were plagued by the terrible luck after playing this game. Despite these warnings, the protagonist downloads the file and loads it onto a Game Boy emulator, eager to see what the fuss was really all about. At first, Misfortune GB appears to be a simple black and white platform with crude pixel graphics and eerie chiptune music. The game starts with a strange introduction screen that reads, "There is no escape." This message unsettles the protagonist, but they continue playing. The main character is a small shadowy figure with large hollow eyes. The game world is barren with twisted trees and broken pathways. Unlike most platforms, there are no enemies, no power-ups, and no real instructions. As the protagonist progresses, they come across an NPC, a small unsettling figure with a distorted face. When they interact with it, a dialogue box appears, displaying a small question: will you surrender? The game only provides two choices, yes and no. Curious, the protagonist selects no, expecting some kind of consequence. Instead, the screen glitches, the music distorts into an unsettling, wrapped version of itself, and the game suddenly restarts. Now, things are different. The game's once simple background are now darker, and strange shapes start to appear in the distance, almost resembling faces watching from the shadows. The protagonist notices that the in-game character moves more sluggish, as if weighed down by something unseen. They push forward, trying to figure out the game's purpose, but every time they encounter the same NPC and refuse to surrender, the game restarts with more unsettling changes. After several attempts, the protagonist finally chooses yes out of frustration. This time, the screen flickers and a new message appears: "Your misfortune is now ours." The game abruptly closes itself. Confused, the protagonist reopens the emulator, only to find out that the ROM file is gone. The game has seemingly deleted itself. Shaken but intrigued, they brush it off as a well-made horror hoax until strange things start happening in real life. Over the next few days, the protagonist experiences a series of eerie and unexplained events. Their computer crashes repeatedly, and strange files with unreadable names would appear on their desktop. At night, they hear faint whispers, though no one else is home. They begin to feel watched, sensing an unseen presence lurking just outside their field of vision. Worst of all, their luck that takes a drastic turn for the worse. Appliances break down, they narrowly avoid an accident, and a series of minor but unsettling mishaps make them feel like the game's misfortune has followed them into reality. Desperate to get rid themselves of whatever curse they might have unleashed, the protagonist tries to find the game again and again, hoping to undo whatever they did. But no matter how much they search, the misfortune.gb ROM is nowhere to be found. The forum where they first discovered it is gone, as it never existed. No one else seems to remember the thread of the people who posted this game. As time passes, the protagonist becomes more paranoid, convinced that the game left something bad behind. They start seeing shadowy figures come in corners of the room, always disappearing when they look directly at them. The whispers grow louder at night, and they begin to suffer from strange nightmares, visions of the game's worlds, the twisted trees, and the haunting NPC who keeps repeating, "There is no escape." The story ends with the protagonist unsure if they're losing their mind or is it just the game that truly did something to them. They warn anyone reading to never search for misfortune.gb and to never under any circumstances play it, but the final chilling thoughts lingers: if the game is truly gone, why does it still feel like something is watching? Misfortune.gb is a classic cursed game creepypasta that taps into the fear of haunted technology, digital curses, and the idea that something on the internet should never be downloaded. It leaves readers wondering if the protagonist was just imagining things or if they really did unleash something far more sinister than simply a Game Boy game. The Showers. The Showers is a creepypasta that follows the narrator, a man who recalls a terrifying experience from his childhood. It all begins when he's in 5th grade, Living in a small Midwest town, his teacher, Mr. Mays, is known for telling scary stories every October, and the class eagerly looks forward to them. But one year, Mr. May tells a story that is different from the usual ghost tales. His story is unsettling, disturbing, and mostly important. He swears that it really happened to him. Mr. Mays explains that back when he was in college, he and his friends used to go on road trips to explore abandoned places. One weekend, they planned a trip to an old, rundown house in the middle of nowhere. They had heard rumors about it, stories of strange noises, disappearances, and people who went inside never being the same afterward. When they arrived, they found the house surprisingly intact, though covered in dust and decay. But the strangest part was what they found in the basement, a long hallway lined with the shower heads, like an old industrial-style locker room. There was no reason for a place to be like this or have a setup like that, and something about it felt deeply unsettling. The group joked about it at first, making fun of the eerie atmosphere, but then they started hearing some noises. Scraping sounds, distant whispers, and the faint patter of something moving. The deeper they went into the basement, the more uneasy they felt. Suddenly, all the shower heads turned on at once, pouring out a thick black liquid with an overpowering rotting stench. Panicking, the group rushed to the exit. Mr. Mays saw something lurking in the darkness. Though he never described exactly what he saw, the fear in his voice as he told the story made it clear that it was something unnatural, something that should have not been there. They all escaped, but whatever was in that basement had left its mark on him, and he swore he would never go back. The narrator and his classmates are deeply unsettled by the story, but as the years go by, he starts to believe it was just an exaggerated campfire tale. However, the memory of the showers stays with him. Years later, when he is in college, he decides to track down the location Mr. Mays described. He spends time researching it and eventually finds a lead, an old abandoned house in a rural town that matches the description. Against his better judgment, he drives out to investigate, bringing a friend along the trip. When they arrived, the house is exactly as Mr. May had described it, old, broken down, and eerily quiet. They had made their way inside, searching for the basement. Just like in the story, they find the hallway lined with the shower heads, covered in dust and grime, as if it hasn't been ever touched in decades. But the moment they step inside, an overwhelming sense of dread washes over them. The air goes thick, they hear faint noises, whispers echoing from unseen sources. Suddenly, the shower heads turn on. Instead of water, the same thick black liquid spills out, filling the room with a putrid stench. The two friends turn to run, but as they do, something emerges from the darkness. The narrator catches only a glimpse, a shape-shifting and unnatural. Something inhuman was walking towards them. They didn't stay to find out what it is. Sprinting outside the basement, they barely escape, slamming the door behind them and speeding away in their car, refusing to look back. Their experiences leave them shaken, and the narrator realizes that Mr. May had been telling the truth all along. Whatever was in that house, whatever was in the showers, it was real. He never returns to that location again, and never tells anyone else about what happened, except for this story, shared as a warning. The creepypasta ends with an eerie uncertainty. What was exactly in the showers? What did the house have such a bizarre setup for? And most importantly, what happened to those who didn't escape in time? The story leaves these questions unanswered, letting the reader's imagination fill in the terrifying blanks. The Wanderer. The Wanderer is a creepypasta that tells an eerie and unsettling story of a mysterious figure known as the Wanderer, a being that appears out of nowhere and leaves a trail of fear and unanswered questions behind. This story follows the perspective of an unnamed author who recalls a strange encounter from their childhood. It begins when they move to a small, quiet town with their family. The town itself is unremarkable, just another rural community while everyone knows each other, and nothing exciting ever happens. That is until the night the Wanderer appears. One evening, as the narrator is getting ready for bed, they hear an unusual noise outside their window. Looking out, they see a man standing perfectly still at the edge of the street. Just beyond the glow of the streetlights, he is dressed in a long, tattered coat, with the hood pulled low over his face, hiding his features. At first, the narrator assumes he is just a lost traveler or a homeless man passing through, but something about his presence feels wrong. The way he stands so motionless, and the eerie silence around him, and the unsettling feeling that he is somehow aware of being watched. The next morning, the figure is gone, and the narrator assumes it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But over the following days, people in town start talking about a strange lurking guy in the street at night. He never moves, he never speaks, just stands in the shadows watching. Some claim they saw him closer to their houses, standing just outside their front doors on the end of their driveways. A few even say that they seen him staring directly into their windows in the dead of the night. Despite his unsettling presence, no one ever sees him arrive or leave. He is simply there, as if he materializes out of thin air. As the days go by, fear grips the town. People start locking their doors earlier, keeping their children inside and avoiding streets after dark. But no matter how much they try to ignore him, the Wanderer continues to appear. Strangers still, anyone who asks about him too much, anyone who admits seeing him too closely, disappear without a trace. One evening, the narrator's curiosity gets to the better of them. They stay up late, determined to see the Wanderer for themselves. As the night deepens, they hear a faint whispered sound, almost like the wind carrying voices. Peeking through the blinds, they see him again, this time standing in their own backyard. The narrator is paralyzed with fear. The Wanderer doesn't move, but they can feel him watching them, even without seeing his face. A deep, overwhelming dread washes over them, as if something ancient and malevolent is staring straight into their soul. Then, without warning, the Wanderer starts to move, but not like a normal person. His movements are unnatural, distorted like watching a film that skips frames or rewinds itself. One moment, he's at the back fence, the next, he's halfway to the house. The narrator's heart pounds as they realize he's getting closer. Panicking, they dive into underneath their blankets, squeezing their eyes shut, hoping it's just a nightmare. They lie there, frozen, listening to the eerie silence stretch on. Then comes a soft, deliberate tapping on the window. The narrator doesn't dare to move. The tapping continues, slow and rhythmic, almost like the Wanderer is waiting for them to respond. After what feels like hours, the tapping stops. The next morning, they wake up to find their windows covered in long, thin scratches, as if something had been dragging their fingers across the glass. The Wanderer is nowhere to be seen. Terrified, the narrator begs their family to leave the town immediately. Their parents don't believe them, but when they hear that another neighbor has mysteriously vanished overnight, they don't need any more convincing. They pack up their things and leave, never look back. Years later, the narrator comes across an old newspaper article about their childhood town. The headline reads, "Town mysteriously abandoned. Residents disappear without a trace." There is no explanation for what happened. The entire town simply vanished as if it had never existed. Psychosis. Psychosis is a physiological horror creepypasta that follows a man named John as he slowly loses his grip on reality. The story is written in the form of journal entries, making it feel personal and immediate as the reader experiences John's descent into paranoia firsthand. The story begins with John, a man living alone in his apartment, going about his normal routine. He works as a computer programmer and doesn't have much interaction with people outside of the occasional phone call or an online chat. One day he notices that his internet connection and his phone signal have gone down. At first he assumes it's just a minor issue with the service provider, but as the hours pass, his frustration grows. He tries turning on the television, only to find static on every channel. Now, completely disconnected from the outside world, he starts to feel uneasy. As time goes on, John begins to feel like something is wrong, but he can't quite explain why. He starts to suspect that something bad had happened outside his apartment, something that no one is telling him about. His paranoia increases when he hears strange noises in the hallway. He looks through the peephole of his door but sees nothing. Convinced that someone or something is out there watching him, he starts blocking his windows and reinforcing his door, trying to keep himself safe. Days pass and John begins to lose track of his time. His isolation and fear grow stronger, and he starts to question reality itself. He wonders if he is the only person left in the world. The silence feels overwhelming, and every small noise sends him into a panic. Eventually, he decides to take a risk and send a message to a friend using his computer. To his surprise, the message goes through, and his friend responds. Relieved, John tells his friend about his fears and asks what's going on outside. His friend replies with confusion, telling John that everything is perfectly normal. There's no crisis, no disaster, just an ordinary day. John's mind races with possibilities. He wonders if his friend is lying to him or if something has taken over his friend's mind and is pretending to be him. His paranoia convinces him that whatever it is outside just has found a way to manipulate people, controlling them like puppets. He starts to believe that anyone who's trying to reach him isn't real and is instead playing a part of whatever it is. As his fears worsens, John begins hallucinating. He sees figures in the shadows, hearing whispers through the walls, and starts doubting his own memories. He barely eats or sleeps, too terrified to let his guard down. Then one day, his apartment door unlocks by itself. Panic takes over and he hides in his bathroom, shaking with fear. He hears voices calling his name, but they sound distorted. He's convinced that whatever it is outside has finally come for him. Just when he thinks he's about to die, The door swings open and he's faced with his best friend, the friend that, along the whole group of people, looks at him with deep concern. They tell him that they've been trying to reach him for days. John doesn't believe them at first, still convinced they're imposters, but then as they carefully explain what's been happening, the terrible truth starts to sink in. John was never in danger. There was no world-ending event, no unseen monsters lurking in the shadows. The truth is, John was suffering from a psychotic break. His mind has created the entire nightmare, making him believe that the reality itself was out to get him. His isolation had his paranoia trapping him in his own mind. The story ends with John in a hospital, where he's being treated for his condition. As he slowly recovers, he begins to understand what had happened, but deep down, he can't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, his fears were real. What if somehow, truly, there was someone out there, watching him, and what if it's still waiting for him to let his guard down? Where Bad Kids Go. Where Bad Kids Go is a chilling creepypasta about a man who recalls a disturbing children's television from his childhood back in Lebanon. The story explores the dark memories of the show and the horrifying truth that the narrator uncovers as an adult. The story begins with the narrator explaining what he's seen when he was young. He watched a low-budget children's show in Lebanon that was meant to scare kids into behaving. The show had a simple format. It taught more lessons in the form of short, unsettling skits. The main theme was to show children what would happen if they misbehaved. Unlike typical educational shows, this one was deeply unsettling, with eerie music, strange sound effects, and a terrifying atmosphere. One of the show's most disturbing elements was how it ended up each episode. Every episode would conclude with the same image, a crude door like one found in an old basement or a dungeon. The camera would zoom in on the door and the sound of a loud, agonizing scream echoed from each side. Then in Arabic, the screen would display the ominous phrase, "This is where bad kids go." The message was clear. Children who misbehaved would end up behind that door. The narrator recalls how terrified he was of the show as a child. The screaming comes from behind that door were particularly disturbing. They sounded too real, too raw, as if they were actual recordings of suffering. The show's unsettling nature stuck with him throughout adulthood, but he had never been able to find any information on it. He wondered if it was just a product of cruel era or it had been forgotten entirely. Years later, as an adult and a journalist, the narrator's curiosity got the better of him. He decided to investigate the origins of the program. His research eventually led him into an old studio building that had been abandoned for years. It was rumored to be the place where the show was filmed. Excited and nervous, he ventured inside, hoping to uncover some answers. Inside, the studio was falling apart, with dust and decay all over everything. As he explored, he stumbled upon something chilling, an old, rusted metal door, exactly like the one from the show. His heart pounded as he realized this might be the door, the one where the bad kids supposedly went. Overwhelmed by fear and curiosity, he slowly opens the door. What he found inside haunts him forever. The room was filled with small human remains, bones, shackles, and evidence of a horrific torture. The walls were stained with something dark, and the air carried the scent of death and decay. The narrator was frozen in shock, realizing that the screams in the show had not been fake, they had been real. The show had not just been a tool to scam children into behaving, it had been something far worse, a front for real children abuse and murder. The show's producers had apparently used real children, and those who were deemed bad had suffered unimaginable fates behind that very door. The story ends with the narrator unable to process what he had just seen. The horrifying truth is too much to handle. As he stands there, staring at the gruesome evidence, he knows that he has undiscovered something truly evil. But there are no answers, no justice, just a chilling realization that somewhere, someone had made an entire television show about a real suffering. The Romanian Knowledge Experiment. The Romanian Knowledge Experiment is a chilling creepypasta about a secret and mysterious scientific study conducted in Romania. The story revolves around an experiment that aimed to test the limits of human cognition of what happens with people who are exposed to knowledge they were never meant to understand. The narrator explains that in the 20th century, a group of Romanian scientists and philosophers set out a conduct for a radical psychological experiment. Their goal was to find out if there was any limit to human knowledge, if there were things that human brain could not or should not comprehend. The experiment was carried out in total secrecy, with no official records and only a handful of whispers and leaked documents hinting at its existence. The scientists carefully selected 5 test subjects, all of whom were highly intelligent individuals, scholars, mathematicians, and linguists. These subjects were placed in a sealed underground facility and given access to an unknown source of information. Some sources claim that it was a book, others say it was symbols of an ancient manuscript, possibly even something that predicted written language itself. What was clear, however, was that this knowledge was unlike anything ever recorded. For the first few days, the test subjects seemed fine. They read, analyzed, and discussed the information that was given to them. But then they started to change. They began to act strangely, staring blankly at walls, speaking in fragmented sentences, or repeating phrases that made no sense. They complained of constant whispers in their ears, describing voices in languages that didn't even exist. By the second week, one of the subjects had to be removed from the experiment after he had gouged out his own eyes, screaming that he could still see too much. Another was found muttering mathematical equations that made no sense, drawing impossible shapes on the walls, shapes that seemed to shift and move when they looked at for too long. As the days went on, things became worse. The remaining subjects began to show signs of several mental distress. They refused to sleep, claiming that they would close their eyes. They saw some things that shouldn't exist. One of them, a historian, wrote in his notebook, "It is not meant for us. We were not supposed to know." Then, on the 14th day, the experiment went silent. When the scientists checked on their subjects, they found something horrifying. One of them had vanished without a trace, no sign of escape, no evidence of foul play. The other four were huddled together, whispering the same phrase over and over and again, in a different language that had never been documented. Their faces were twisted in expressions of pure terror. The scientists realized they had gone too far, attempting to shut down the experiment, but something had already changed in the subjects. Their bodies began to deteriorate, even though they were still alive. Their eyes darkened, their skin grew pale and sickly, and their speech became incomprehensible. One of them managed to smile before collapsing into convulsions, laughing until his lungs gave out. In the end, the remaining subjects were sealed inside the facility. Their final words etched onto the walls: "We let it in." The Romanian government covered up the entire incident, destroying all records and ensuring that no one would ever attempt to replicate the experiment. However, rumors of the Romanian knowledge experiment continues to circulate in obscure internet forums. Some claim that the lost knowledge still exists, hidden in ancient texts or encoded into forgotten languages. Others warn that those who search for it are doomed to suffer the same fate as the original test subjects. The story ends with an ominous message. There are some things humans were never meant to understand, and once you do, there is no way back. On the Bus. On the Bus is a creepypasta about a disturbing bus ride that slowly becomes a nightmare. The story follows a man who takes a late-night bus ride only to realize that something is horribly wrong with both passengers and the journey itself. The narrator explains that he was traveling home late one evening. It wasn't his usual routine, but he stayed out later than expected and had no choice but to take the night bus. The streets were mostly empty and the bus stop was eerily quiet. When the bus finally arrived, it seemed nothing at first glance. But as he stepped on, he felt a strange sense of unease. The driver barely acknowledged him, staring blankly ahead, and the few passengers already seated were oddly silent. They sat unnaturally still, barely moving or reacting to his presence. He brushed it off as an exhaustion and found a seat, assuming the ride would be uneventful. However, as the bus moved forward, things started to feel more unsettling. The lights inside flickered, casting strange shadows, and the outside world seemed darker than usual, almost like the bus was driving into an endless void. As he sat there, he began to notice something strange about the passengers. None of them were making any noise, no rustling of clothes, no shifting in their seats, nothing. Even when the bus hit bumps in the road, they didn't react. It was as if they were actually not alive. Feeling more uncomfortable, he tries to focus on the window, but the view outside didn't make any sense. The bus seemed to be traveling on an endless stretch of a road, with no turns or intersections. He couldn't recognize any of the scenery, despite knowing the area well. He decided to move seats, hoping to shake the uneasy feeling. As he walked down the aisle, he got a better look at the other passengers. Their faces were blank, emotionless, and their eyes looked lifeless. One man's head was slightly tilted, his mouth slightly open, but there was no breathing, no blinking, just an empty stare. The narrator started to panic. He turned to the driver to ask where they were going, but the man didn't respond. He just kept staring ahead, gripping the wheel too tightly. The road outside was now completely unrecognizable, surrounded by nothing but darkness. It felt as if the bus was no longer in the real world. Desperate to escape, the narrator ran towards the back door, hoping it might be open, but as he reached it, he noticed something terrifying. The passengers were now turning their heads towards him, all at once. Their empty eyes locked onto him, and their mouths slowly stretched into an unnatural twisted smiles. Terrified, he pounded on the door, yelling for the driver to stop. The bus didn't slow down. Instead, it started to move faster, the world outside blurring into a strange, colorless void. Then, without warning, everything went black. When the narrator woke up, he was lying on a cold bus seat. The bus was empty now, no driver, no passengers, just silence. The doors were open, and he quickly stepped out, realizing he was back to his original bus stop, as if nothing had ever happened. The city looked normal again, and the bus had vanished the moment he turned around. To this day, he has no explanation for what happened, no missing time, and no record of the bus he had ever even taken. He avoided late-night buses now, afraid that one day he might not be lucky enough to step off before it's too late again. The Quiet Sky. The Quiet Sky is a creepypasta that explores a mysterious and unsettling change in the world, one of them that seems small at first but grows into something deeply disturbing. The story follows a man who begins to notice that something is missing from everyday life. As he searches for the answers, he realizes that the world may not be as stable as he once believed. The narrator first notices the change while taking a walk outside. It's a clear day, but something feels off. He can't quite put his finger on it until he looks up at the sky. That's when he realizes what's missing. There are no airplanes. The sky is completely empty. At first he thinks it's just a coincidence. Maybe there aren't any flights scheduled in his area at the moment, but as the days pass, he becomes more aware of the eerie silence above him. Normally commercial planes, small private aircraft, or even a distant trace of jets would be visible. Now there's nothing. No contrails, no distant rumbles of engines, no flashing lights in the night sky. The realization unsettles him, but when he mentions it to others, they either don't notice or brush it off as it's not important. Determined to find an explanation, he starts researching online. To his surprise, there's almost no discussion about the missing airplanes. Flight tracking websites show flights as if they're still happening, but he finds no real proof that any of them are actually in the air. No one posts pictures of airplanes, no one talks about delayed flights, and airports seemed oddly quiet. As his paranoia grows, he tries to contact someone directly involved in aviation. He sends emails to airlines, but he either gets a generic automated response or no reply at all. When he calls an airport, they just put him on hold forever. The lack of answers only make him more anxious. One night, he decided to drive to the nearest airport himself. He expects to see passengers' flights taking off and landing, and all the usual hustle and bustle of an airport. Instead, he finds the parking lot half empty. Inside the airport, everything looks normal at first glance, but when he looks closely, something feels staged. The few people there seem to be walking around without any real purpose, as if they're just playing a role. He looks at the departure and arrival boards, which display flight information as usual, but no announcements are being made. The speakers hum with quite static instead of usual voices calling passengers to board. He watches the runway from a window, waiting for a plane to land. Minutes pass, then an hour, but nothing comes. The runway stays empty. Panicked, he walks up to the gate agent and asks when the next flight will arrive. The agent smiles but doesn't really answer, as if he's trying to remember something. Finally, they respond with a vague, rephrased statement about a minor delay. When he presses further, asking if they have personally seen any plane today, their smile fades. They look past him and, as if they're waiting for someone else to step in. Feeling a sudden wave of dread, he quickly leaves the airport. Back at home, he tries to calm himself, but the fear lingers. The sky remains empty and now he starts to wonder what else might be missing. He listens carefully for his surroundings, paying attention to things once he took for granted. Were there always these few birds? Has the traffic on his street always been this quiet? One night, unable to sleep, he steps outside. The sky is darker than usual, not just because of the lack of airplanes, but because the stars seem different. They don't twinkle the way they should. It's as if they were just painted onto a massive ceiling. Then for the first time in weeks, he hears something from above, a low, mechanical hum. Hope rises in him. Maybe a plane is finally flying overhead. But as soon as he looks up, he realizes the sound is wrong. It doesn't belong in any aircraft he had ever seen before. It's steady, unnatural, and growing louder. The last thing the narrator describes is a sudden pressure in his head, as if something enormous is passing beyond the visible sky. The world around him feels frozen, as if time itself had stopped for a moment. Then just as suddenly, the sound is gone. The night is silent once more. The story ends with the narrator left in uncertainty. He doesn't know what's happening or why, but he is sure of one thing. Something in the world has changed. The sky isn't empty, it's just hiding something, and whatever it is, he's not supposed to notice. Normalpornfornormalpeople.com. Normalpornfornormalpeople.com is a creepypasta about a mysterious website that appears to host disturbing, unsettling, and downright terrifying content hidden beneath an innocent-sounding name. The story follows an unnamed narrator who stumbles upon the site and begins to uncover its dark secrets. The narrator explains that he first learned about normalpornnormalpeople.com for an email he had received. The email contained only a simple message: normal porn for normal people, a website dedicated of abnormal sexuality. Along with the message was a link to a website. Out of curiosity, the narrator decided to visit the site, expecting to find something strange or unsettling. When he arrived at the homepage, he found basic, outdated-looking website with plain white background, black text, and no images. The site had simple statement about promoting normal pornography for normal people, but something about it felt off. There were no bizarre traditional pornographic images or videos, just a collection of strange video files with bizarre names. Curious, the narrator downloaded several videos to see what they actually contained. At first, the videos seemed harmless but odd. Some of them featured seemingly random and mundane content, like a man sitting at a desk eating a sandwich, or a woman grooming her cat for several minutes. There was nothing sexual about them, yet they felt eerily wrong, as if there was something unseen lurking beneath the surface. As the narrator continued watching, he found more disturbing videos. One showed a man dressed in a suit, sitting silently in front of a camera, staring at the screen for several minutes before the footage abruptly cut to black. Another video featured a group of people sitting on the floor with their backs to the camera, rocking back and forth while whispering in a strange rhythmic manner. The most disturbing video was when the narrator found what was called stumps. It started as a shaky handheld recording of a person tied to a mattress, unable to move. A man wearing a mask entered the frame, holding a sickle. The masked man that approached the restrained person and slowly began cutting into their legs showed no emotions as the victim struggled and screamed. The video ended suddenly, leaving the narrator horrified. After watching these videos, the narrator felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He tried returning to the website the next day, but it had disappeared. The domain no longer existed, and every attempt to find information about it led to dead ends. It was as if the site never had been there in the first place. Determined to learn more, he searched online forums for any mention of the site. He found a few discussions where other users claimed to have encountered the website as well. Some described seeing the disturbing videos, while others claimed they had found even worse content. Videos that contained messages spoken in distorted voices, figures standing in the shadows, and footage that seemed to be of real crimes. Some users reported that after visiting the site, they began receiving strange emails, some of them which contained cryptic messages or links to even darker corners of the internet. A few people even claimed that they were being watched or followed after attempting to investigate the site. The more the narrator read, the more he realized that normalpornfornormalpeople.com wasn't just a website, it was something far more sinister. The creepypasta ends with the narrator warning others never to seek to this website. Whether it was front or something illegal, a psychological experiment, or something even more sinister, he didn't know. All he knew was that those who dug too deep often disappeared, and he was afraid that he might be next. The Rugrats. The Rugrats creepypasta is an unsettling reinterpretation of the beloved Nickelodeon cartoon, claiming that the show's premise is far darker than it appears. The story suggests that all of the babies in Rugrats, Tommy, Chucky, Phil, and Lil, never actually existed, but were instead hallucinations created by Angelica, the spoiled and often mean-spirited toddler. According to the creepypasta, Angelica was a deeply troubled child who created the Rugrats in her mind for a way to cope with her loneliness and trauma. Each baby's story is written to fit the tragic theory. Tommy Pickles, the brave leader of the group, was never born in the version of the events. His father, Stu Pickles, was obsessed with making toys because he was dealing with the grief of losing his stillborn son. Chucky Finster, the nervous and cautious friend, had also died in the alternative reality, along with his mother in a car accident. This loss supposedly left his father, Chaz, a nervous wreck, who is why he always seemed so anxious and overprotective. Phil and Lil DeVal, the adventurous twins, never existed either. According to the theory, their mother, Betty, had been pregnant, but the pregnancy ended up before anyone could learn if the baby was a boy or a girl. Because of this uncertainty, Angelica created Phil and Lil as two versions of the same baby, one male and one female to fill the gap. Angelica, the supposed creator of this fantasy, was described as suffering from neglect from possible abuse. Her mother was often absent, and her father was too busy with work to pay her much attention. Because she had no real friends, she invented the Rugrats to keep herself company. She would play with them and talk to them, but since they only existed in her imagination, no one else could see them. The theory also extends that the older characters in Rugrats, All Grown Up, the spin-off where the babies are shown as preteens, in this version Angelica became a teenager and started using drugs, which worsened her mental state. Her hallucinations continued, but now she struggled to separate from them from reality. Eventually, she was unable to cope with the truth, and the story suggests may have met a tragic end. The story also claims that one real child existed in the Rugrats universe, Dill Pickles, Tommy's younger brother. Unlike the other babies, Dill was not a figment of Angelica's imagination, he was a real child. However, because Angelica was so used to controlling her imaginary world, she struggled with Dill, and he did not behave the way she wanted. This led her to becoming frustrated and violent towards him. According to the creepypasta, she once hit Dill in a fit of rage, which resulted in permanent brain damage. This, the story claims, is why Dill appears different and acts strangely in All Grown Up. While this theory is purely fictional, it had disturbed many fans because it was taken cheerful and nostalgic show and turns it into something tragic and unsettling. The idea that the Rugrats was actually the product of one child's trauma and loneliness is a stark contrast for the fun, adventurous world portrayed the actual cartoon. In reality, there is no evidence that the creators of Rugrats intended any of this. It is simple fan-made creepypasta, designed to make people see the show in a different and eerie way. However, the story has spread widely online, with many people discussing and analyzing if it could be true. Annie 96 is Typing. Annie 96 is Typing is a creepypasta-style horror story told entirely through a text conversation between two friends, Annie and her friend David. This entire story unfolds in a real time through their chat messages, making it feel eerily realistic, as if the reader is watching an actual conversation happening right in front of them. The story begins innocently enough. Annie and David are chatting late at night, joking around and teasing each other. David asks Annie why she's still up so late, and she explains that she couldn't sleep. She mentions that she can hear strange noises outside her window, but she assumes it's just wind or maybe her cat. David playfully teases her about being scared, but then Annie's messages suddenly take a more serious turn. She says that she sees someone standing in her backyard. At first, she thinks that it might be her boyfriend, but as she describes the figure more, she realizes something is off. The person is standing completely still and staring at her house. David tries to keep her calm and suggests she locks the door just to be safe. Annie becomes more anxious, telling him that the person looks familiar, almost like David himself. Confused, David insists that it can't be him because he is at home, chatting with her, but Annie insists that the figure looks exactly like him, wearing the same hoodie he was wearing earlier that day. She then makes a terrifying realization that the figure isn't just standing there anymore, it's moving. Panicking, she tells David that the figure had climbed over the fence and is now staring at her window. She describes how its face is blank, almost as if it has no real features, just a vague resemblance to him. David, now alarmed, tells her to get out the house and call the police, but Annie is now frozen with fear. Things take even a darker turn when Annie messages David that she hears knocking on her window. Then she says something that makes the situation even worse, that the figure just typed a message to be on her phone. David is confused. How could someone outside by her window type messages to her? Annie begins to panic even more, saying that her phone is glitching and the messages are getting jumbled. The figure is no longer just at her window, it's inside the house. David frantically tells her to hide and stay quiet. Annie says she is going to her parents' room, but then she stops responding. All David sees is Annie 96 is typing on his screen, but no messages come through. He keeps calling her out, but nothing happens. Then the chat ends. Annie never responds again. The story leaves the reader with no clear answers. Was the figure really a doppelganger of David? Was it a supernatural entity? A stalker? Or was Annie just imagining everything? The ambiguity is what makes the story so unsettling. Readers are left to wonder what happened, and Annie and whether was she taken or killed or simply just vanished. What makes Annie 96 is Typing especially creepy is that it's a realistic format. Because it's written as a live chat, it feels authentic, as it could happen to anyone. The sense of helpless, watching someone get trapped into a terrifying situation while being unable to do anything but read their message adds to the horror. Annie 96 is Typing leaves a lingering sense of paranoia that next time someone else is typing on their screen late at night, they might just wonder what's really going on the other end. The Diary of Mr. Welldone. The Diary of Mr. Welldone is a disturbing creepypasta about a man's descent into madness, told through a series of diary entries. It's followed the life of Mr. Welldone, an ordinary man who gradually becomes obsessed with strange presence in his home, leading to terrifying conclusion. The story begins with Mr. Weldone's first diary entry. where he describes his diary life. He seems like a normal person, living alone in his house and enjoying simple pleasures. However, as time goes on, he begins to notice strange things happening around him. At first, they are small, itself moving slightly out of place, hearing faint whispers and unsettling feelings of being watched. He brushes these off as tricks of his mind, but the incidents grow more intense. One night, he hears footsteps in his hallway, convinced that he is just tired and imagining things that he tried to ignore. But then the next morning, he finds objects rearranged in his home. Like his chair has been moved, the kitchen cabinets are open, and the salt shaker is on the opposite end of the table. Mr. Weldon becomes increasingly paranoid. He starts setting small traps, like placing objects in specific positions to see if they move overnight. To his horror, they do. Determined to find answers, he begins staying awake at night, watching and waiting for the intruder. However, nothing ever happens while he is looking. The moment he lets his guard down, though, he starts to feel like something is playing a game with him, teasing him by waiting until he is asleep or distracted. The realization deeply unsettles him, but he still refuses to believe that anything supernatural is at play. Over time, his diary entries become more erratic. He stops writing about his daily life and instead focuses entirely on the strange occurrences in his home. He becomes obsessed with finding proof, setting up mirrors in different angles to catch a glimpse of whatever might be lurking in his house. But instead of getting answers, his fear only grows. He starts seeing shadows, figures in his peripheral vision, but whenever he turns to look, there is nothing there. One night, something changes. He wakes up to find himself standing in his living room, even though he went to bed hours ago. Confused and scared, he rushes back to his room, but before he closes the door, he swears he sees a figure standing in the dark hallway. Too afraid to investigate, he locks himself in the room for the rest of the night. As the days go by, Mr. Weldon's mental state deteriorates. He begins losing time, waking up in different parts of the house with no memory of how he got there. His entries become more desperate. He starts referring to it as a living thing, something intelligent and cruel that enjoys toying with him. He writes about how no longer he feels alone in his own body, as if something is inside of him, whispering to him, influencing his actions. Then his diary entries become scattered, with whole days missing. When he finally writes again, his tone has finally changed completely. He no longer sounds scared but instead accepting. He claims that he has finally seen it and understands it now. He no longer fights against whatever is happening to him. Instead, he welcomes it. The final entry is brief and cryptic. He writes, "I am no longer Mr. Weldon. I see now. I understand." Then the diary ends. The story leaves many questions unanswered. Did Mr. Weldon fall victim to a supernatural entity? Or did his paranoia cause him to lose his mind? Was something really lurking in his home? Or was it all in his head? The diary format makes the story feel deeply personal, as if the reader is witnessing someone slowly unravel. The horror of the Diary of Mr. Weldon comes from its physiological depth. It taps into the fear of losing control, of not knowing whether the danger is real or just a product of its imagination. By the time the story ends and the reader is left with a sense of unease, wondering what truly happened to Mr. Weldon, and if whatever took him could be watching him too.